The champagne glass slipped from her fingers. Grace caught it just in time. But nobody noticed. Nobody ever noticed the pregnant wife standing in the corner, until the moment her husband humiliated her in front of 200 people. "My wife?" Richard laughed, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Grace barely understands what I do. Business is too complicated for her." The room laughed with him. Comfortable, expected, cruel. But what Richard didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that Grace had a secret, a $42 million secret. She was the mysterious investor he'd been desperately searching for, the one who'd just pulled $6 million from his company, the one who could destroy everything he'd built. And in exactly 23 minutes, she was going to tell him. This is the story of a woman who made herself invisible to save her marriage, and the explosive moment when she decided to be seen. What happens next will change everything. For her, for him, for their unborn child. Stay with me, because this story proves that sometimes the most dangerous woman in the room is the one everyone underestimated. Let's begin. The champagne glass slipped. Grace caught it. No one noticed. She stood in the corner of the Riverside Hotel ballroom, 7 months pregnant, watching her husband Richard command the room. The annual Tech Innovators Gala. 200 people in designer clothes and practiced smiles. Grace knew 43 of them professionally. None of them knew her. The silk of her dress clung to her swollen belly. Maternity formal wear. She'd spent 3 hours finding something that made her look elegant instead of enormous. Richard had glanced at her in the car, nodded once. Approval granted. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors. A string quartet played something classical. Mozart, maybe. Grace used to know these things. She used to have opinions about music and art and literature. Now she had opinions about whether her ankles would survive another hour in heels. The baby kicked, hard, right against her ribs. Grace smiled, pressed her hand to the spot. A private moment in a public space. Richard's laugh carried across the ballroom, deep, confident, the sound of a man who owned every room he entered. Grace had fallen in love with that laugh once. Now it just reminded her how far away he always was. He stood surrounded by executives. Owen Bradford at his right, 3 venture capitalists whose names Grace couldn't remember at his left. Richard held court like a king, gesturing broadly, making points, winning arguments no one was having. "My wife," Richard's voice rose above the quartet, "Grace handles the home beautifully. But business?" He shook his head, grinning. "She barely understands what I do." The circle of men laughed, polite, comfortable, expected. Grace's smile didn't falter. Years of practice. Her mother had taught her that. The Morrison women knew how to smile through anything. Disappointment, humiliation, heartbreak. Just keep smiling. But her fingers tightened on the champagne stem. Sparkling water, not champagne. She hadn't had alcohol in 7 months. Richard kept forgetting, kept offering her wine at dinner, kept having to be reminded that she was growing a human being. Beth appeared at her elbow, suddenly, protectively. "Did he just say what I think he said?" Beth's voice was low, dangerous. "It's fine," Grace replied, her voice steady and practiced. "It's not fine. He just told 200 people you're stupid. He said I don't understand his business. That's different." "Is it?" Grace said nothing. The silence was its own answer. Beth had been her college roommate. Freshman year at Stanford, they'd stayed close through everything, through Grace's MBA at Wharton, through Beth's nursing degree, through Grace's engagement to Richard, through the slow erosion of everything Grace used to be. Beth was the only person who still called her Grace Morrison instead of Grace Hartwell. The only person who remembered who she'd been before. "I'm getting you out of here," Beth said. "I can't leave. Richard needs me here." "For what? Decoration?" The word hit like a slap, accurate, painful. Grace took a sip of sparkling water. The bubbles burned her throat. The baby kicked again, persistent, like he knew something was wrong. Or she. Grace still didn't know. The envelope from Dr. Raines sat unopened in her nightstand drawer. Richard wanted to be surprised. Grace wanted to know. But Richard's wants always won. Owen Bradford approached Richard. Urgent whisper. Richard's expression shifted. The confident smile cracked. Concern replaced charisma. Then anger darkened his features. Owen showed him something on his phone. Richard went pale. Grace watched from across the ballroom. She knew what was on that screen. The email, the withdrawal notification. $6 million. Gone. She took another sip of water. Perfectly calm. Richard's eyes scanned the crowd. Not for her, never for her. For solutions. For Owen. For anyone who could fix this problem his wife was too stupid to understand. Grace counted backward from 10. A trick from therapy. The therapist Richard didn't know she saw. 10, 9, 3, 8, breathe. 7, 6, focus. 4, smile. 3, 2, stay calm. 1. The baby did a somersault. Grace pressed both hands to her belly. The silk stretched tight over her fingers. We're okay, she whispered. Too quiet for anyone to hear. We're going to be fine. But watching Richard's panic from across the ballroom, watching him search for help from everyone except his pregnant wife standing 20 feet away, Grace felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart, something harder, something she'd been building for 3 years. The facade. Her phone vibrated in her clutch. She pulled it out carefully. Discreetly. A text from Dylan. Confirm? Grace glanced at Richard, still panicking, still searching, still ignoring her. She typed back with one thumb. Confirmed. The message sent. No turning back now. The baby settled, like he understood. Or she, their child, growing inside her, listening to everything, learning what love looked like in the Hartwell family. Grace decided right then. In the corner of the Riverside Hotel ballroom, with 200 people laughing and drinking and networking around her, their child would learn something different. The microphone screeched. Feedback. Someone laughed nervously. The moment passed. Richard caught her eye across the room. Finally, for the first time all evening. His expression was pure panic. He mouthed something. Grace couldn't read lips. Didn't try. She raised her glass, sparkling water catching the light. A toast. To what? She wasn't sure. To endings, maybe, or beginnings. Richard turned away, already forgetting her again. Already solving problems with people who mattered. People who understood business. People who weren't his pregnant wife. Grace finished her water, set the glass on a passing tray, placed both hands on her belly. The baby kicked. 1, 2, 3 times. Morse code, maybe. Or a warning. Beth touched her arm. You okay? Grace looked at her best friend. Really looked. When was the last time someone had asked if she was okay and actually waited for an answer? No, Grace said honestly. I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time. Then let's fix it. Grace smiled, a real smile this time. Not the practiced one, not the Morrison Women's emergency smile. A real expression of something like hope. Yeah, she said, let's fix it. The thing about being invisible is that you see everything. Grace had been watching for 3 years, watching Richard, watching his business, watching the slow decay of their marriage. Tonight, she stopped pretending she didn't see. Tonight, everything changed. The quartet started a new song, Vivaldi. Grace recognized it now. Spring, the season of new beginnings. How appropriate. The car ride home was silence wrapped in leather and tension. Richard drove, jaw clenched, fingers tight on the steering wheel. Grace sat in the passenger seat, hands folded in her lap, the way she always sat, small, contained, taking up no space. She knew better than to speak first. Not yet. Let him process. Let him decide what he needed from her. 3 years of marriage had taught her the dance. Step back, make space, don't ask questions, don't have opinions. Be decorative, be pregnant, be quiet. Their penthouse was on the 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, minimalist furniture in shades of gray and white, everything clean, everything expensive, everything chosen by Richard's interior designer. Grace used to have opinions about design. She'd kept her grandmother's vintage oak desk. The rest went to storage, or charity. She couldn't remember which. Richard poured himself scotch the moment they entered. Macallan, 50-year-old single malt, the bottle Grace bought him for their second anniversary, back when she still bought him thoughtful gifts, back when he still noticed. 6 million. His voice was flat, empty, just gone. Grace slipped off her heels. 3-inch stilettos, silver, matched the dress. Her feet screamed relief, swollen, aching, 7 months pregnant and still wearing heels because Richard had mentioned once that he liked them. 2 years ago, she'd been wearing them ever since. She walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, added lemon, her nightly ritual. "Tell me about it," she said softly. Richard looked at her, actually looked, for the first time since the gala. His eyes were bloodshot, tired, scared. Then his expression shifted, closed off, patronizing, the look she knew too well. "It's complicated. Try me." He took a long drink of scotch. "Grace, you wouldn't understand the intricacies of venture capital funding structures." The baby kicked, hard enough to make her wince. Richard didn't notice. He was already pulling out his phone. Texting Owen probably, already moving past her. Again, always again. Grace watched him for a moment. This man she'd married. This stranger wearing her husband's face. When had he stopped seeing her? Or had he ever really seen her at all? She walked to their bedroom, down the hallway lined with abstract art Richard's decorator had chosen, past the guest rooms they never used, into the master suite with its king bed and designer sheets and view of the bay that should have felt like heaven, but mostly felt like a cage. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, stared at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back was a stranger, tired, swollen, wearing a silver dress that cost $3,000 and made her feel like an imposter. When did that happen? When did she become someone she didn't recognize? She opened her laptop. MacBook Pro, top of the line. Richard had bought it for her birthday last year. Wrapped it himself, proud. Like he'd really thought about what she needed. She'd smiled, thanked him, never mentioned she already had one. Her work laptop, hidden in her desk drawer, password protected, encrypted. The screen illuminated her face. Blue light in the darkness. Password prompt appeared. Baby Hartwell 2025. Richard had set the password. Grace had never changed it. Easier that way, less explaining. But she had other accounts, other passwords, other lives he knew nothing about. Grace opened the file marked household expenses. It wasn't household expenses. Investment portfolios filled the screen. Acquisition reports, due diligence documents, financial models, market analyses, the language of money and power and control. Her fingers knew this keyboard, this work, these numbers. Before Richard, she'd been Grace Morrison. Before Grace Morrison, she'd been just Grace. Economics degree from Stanford, MBA from Wharton, youngest partner at Morrison Ventures at 26. Her father's firm, West Coast Division. She'd built it from nothing. Then she met Richard at a tech conference in San Francisco. He'd been pitching his startup. Fourth row, confident, charming, ambitious. He didn't know who she was. Didn't know her last name meant money and power and connections. She'd like that, being anonymous, being wanted for herself instead of her portfolio. They dated for 8 months. He'd proposed at sunset over the Golden Gate Bridge. The ring was modest. Beautiful. He'd saved for 3 months. Grace had said yes. Richard suggested she quit Morrison Ventures when they got engaged. Let's start fresh, build something together. Grace had hesitated, just for a moment. Her father had built that firm from nothing. She'd spent 5 years expanding it, proving herself, making a name that wasn't just her father's name. But Richard had held her hands, looked into her eyes. "I want us to be partners, equals. I don't want your family's money or connections. I want you, just you." So she'd quit. They never built anything together. He built, she watched. Grace scrolled through her current portfolio. 63 active investments, tech startups, medical devices, real estate development, green energy, biotech, a diversified collection worth approximately $42 million. Richard had no idea. She closed the laptop, laid back on the bed, still in the silver dress, heels kicked off but everything else still on. Staring at the ceiling, the baby kicked rhythmically. A heartbeat, a reminder. I'm not stupid, Grace whispered to the empty room. I'm not invisible. I chose this. But had she? Or had she just stopped fighting? Had she let it happen one small compromise at a time until she woke up one day and didn't recognize her own reflection? The bedroom door opened. Grace didn't move, didn't pretend to be asleep, just stared at the ceiling. Richard walked in, loosened his tie. Sorry, had to make some calls. At midnight, to solve a problem, with everyone except his wife. It's fine, Grace said. Owen thinks he can trace the investor. Blackwood Capital, anonymous holding company, shell corporations, but there's always a trail. Grace said nothing, just listened. They're specifically targeting me, Richard continued, unbuttoning his shirt. Pulled funding from 3 of my projects. Millions. Just gone. 3 projects. Portland development, green tech acquisition, medical device startup. Grace had flagged all 3 as problematic 6 months ago. Overvalued, poor management, high risk. She'd mentioned it once, over dinner at Bella Vista, Richard's favorite Italian place. She tried to explain the red flags, the discrepancies in the financial statements, the warning signs. Richard had laughed, patted her hand. Leave the business to me, sweetheart. She'd never mentioned it again. What will you do? Grace asked. Find them, convince them to reconsider, whatever it takes. Richard climbed into bed, kissed her forehead. Automatic, perfunctory, then turned away, asleep within minutes. Grace lay awake. The baby moved. The city lights sparkled through the windows, 42 floors above the world, trapped in a golden cage. She remembered their 3rd date, coffee at a small shop in the Mission District. Richard talking about his vision, his dreams. I want to build something that matters, change lives, make a difference. She'd fallen in love with that vision, with the man who saw beyond profits, beyond himself. She remembered their engagement party, Richard's toast. Grace is my partner, my equal. We're going to build a life together, not for each other, but with each other. Everyone had clapped. Grace had believed him. She remembered the first time he'd spoken over her at a dinner party. Just talked right through her story. Didn't notice. Didn't apologize. She remembered the first time he'd corrected her in public. About art. She had an art history minor. He was wrong. She was right. But he'd corrected her anyway. Confident. Certain. She remembered the first time he'd introduced her as just my wife. Not Grace Morrison, Hartwell. Not Grace Morrison, just his wife. Possession, appendage. The moments had stacked up. Quiet, insidious. One dismissal at a time. Until one day she looked around and couldn't remember the last time he'd asked her opinion about anything. Grace turned on her side, carefully. Pregnancy made everything careful. She watched Richard sleep, his face relaxed, peaceful, untroubled. Tomorrow he would search for the mysterious investor. He would call contacts, hire investigators, trace shell corporations. He would do everything except ask his wife if she knew anything, because his wife didn't understand business. His wife barely knew what he did. His wife was just decorative, just pregnant, just there. Grace closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. The baby kicked. The city whispered. And somewhere in the darkness, Grace Morrison Hartwell decided that 3 years of being invisible was enough. Morning light filtered through the windows, soft, golden, beautiful. Grace had been awake for an hour. She always woke before Richard now. Used the quiet time to be herself before putting on the Grace Hartwell costume. She made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, whole wheat toast, fresh berries, orange juice. The same breakfast Richard had eaten for 3 years. He didn't remember when it started. Grace did, the morning after their honeymoon in Bali. He'd mentioned liking the hotel breakfast. She'd replicated it the next day. And the next, and the next. 3 years later, she was still making it. He'd never said thank you, never noticed it was the same meal every single day. Grace added hot sauce to her eggs. Tabasco. She loved spicy food. Richard hated it. She'd stopped using hot sauce 3 years ago. Last week, she'd started again. Richard hadn't noticed. He walked into the kitchen at 7:30, already on his phone, pacing, intense. Owen traced the investor, he said, not to her, into the phone. Bluetooth earpiece. Blackwood Capital, anonymous holding company registered in Delaware. Shell corporations layered 3 deep, but there's always a trail. Always. Grace plated his breakfast, set it at his usual spot, poured his coffee, black, 2 sugars, never changed. She plated her own breakfast, sat at the counter, ate slowly. The baby approved of hot sauce, apparently. Less heartburn today. They're specifically targeting me, Richard continued into his earpiece, walking circuits around the kitchen island. 3 projects, all key investments. Millions pulled at the worst possible time. This is personal. Grace took a bite of toast, chewed, swallowed, said nothing. Richard finally sat, grabbed his fork, still talking. I need to find them, face to face, explain the vision. These projects are solid, good investments. Whoever Blackwood Capital is, they're missing the big picture. The big picture, the Portland development with inflated property values, the green tech acquisition hiding environmental violations, the medical device that would never get FDA approval. 3 disasters waiting to happen. Grace had spent weeks analyzing each one, running scenarios, checking facts. She tried to warn him. Once, he'd dismissed her, so she'd acted instead. 3 projects? Grace kept her voice casual, conversational. Richard waved his hand, dismissive. The Portland development, the green tech thing, the medical device startup, all in critical phases, all requiring capital I no longer have. He shoveled eggs into his mouth, didn't taste them, didn't thank her, just fuel for the machine. What if you can't find them? Grace asked. Richard's head snapped up, his expression darkened. I'll find them, I have to. This company is my legacy, my future. Not our future, his future. He looked at her belly, the baby's future. The baby, not our son, not our daughter. The baby, generic, impersonal, pronoun without identity. Grace's hand moved protectively to her stomach. The baby kicked like he understood. Or she, their child, listening, learning. Richard stood abruptly, grabbed his keys, his briefcase. I'll be at the office all day. Probably late. Don't wait up. The words were automatic. He'd said them 1,000 times. Don't wait up. Don't expect me. Don't need me. The door closed. The silence was deafening. Grace sat alone in their designer kitchen. Morning light streaming through windows that cost more than most people's cars. A breakfast she'd made alone. Again. For the 1,000th time. She pulled out her phone. Opened encrypted email. New message from Dylan waiting. Phase 2? Grace stared at the message. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. This was the moment, the point of no return. She could stop now, pretend the withdrawal was temporary, go back to being invisible, or she could burn it all down. The baby kicked, insistent, persistent, alive. Grace typed, give him 3 more days. She sent the message, set down her phone, finished her breakfast. The eggs were cold now. She ate them anyway. Waste not, want not. Her grandmother's voice. Morrison women didn't waste anything, especially not opportunities. Grace cleaned the kitchen, loaded the dishwasher, wiped the counters. All the domestic tasks Richard assumed just happened by magic. He'd never asked who cleaned, who cooked, who made sure the refrigerator stayed full, and the toilet paper never ran out. The invisible labor of being a wife. She walked to her desk. The vintage oak desk she'd refused to give up. Her grandmother's desk. Solid, heavy, real. The only piece of furniture in this penthouse that was truly hers. Grace opened the bottom drawer, pulled out a file folder. Thick, well organized. Tab dividers. Color-coded notes. 3 years of work. Morrison Ventures West Coast Division. Her division. The one she'd supposedly left behind. Except she hadn't left. She'd renamed, restructured, hidden. Blackwood Capital was Morrison Ventures. Same portfolio, same strategy, same Grace. Just invisible. Dylan Mercer had been her mentor at Morrison Ventures. 15 years older, married with 2 daughters, gay, no romantic complications, just mutual respect and shared vision. When Grace told him she was quitting to marry Richard, Dylan had raised one eyebrow. That was all, just one eyebrow. The judgment was clear. Or, Dylan had said carefully, you could go underground, keep working, just quietly. Why would I do that? Because you're good at this. Because walking away from 5 years of work for a man you've known 8 months seems impulsive. Because maybe you should keep your options open. Grace had laughed. You don't trust Richard. I don't trust anyone who asks you to stop being yourself. Dylan had been right. He usually was. So they'd created Blackwood Capital, shell corporations, anonymous holding companies, Grace's investments running through Dylan's name, legal, clean, secret. For 3 years, Grace Morrison Hartwell had played housewife during the day and venture capitalist at night. Richard never noticed. Why would he? His wife didn't understand business. Grace's phone rang, Dr. Raines's office, her OB/GYN appointment. She'd forgotten. Mrs. Hartwell, this is Jenny from Dr. Raines's office. You missed your 10 o'clock appointment. Grace glanced at the kitchen clock. 11:15. She'd been so focused on breakfast and cleaning and Richard's panic that she'd missed her own appointment. I'm so sorry, Grace said. Can I reschedule? Of course, Dr. Raines has an opening at 2 today if you can make it. I'll be there. Grace hung up, looked around the empty penthouse, the pristine kitchen, the designer furniture, the $1,000,000 view, the golden cage. She remembered the first time Richard forgot her birthday. Year 2 of marriage, he'd apologized profusely. Flowers, dinner, the whole show. She'd forgiven him. She remembered the first time he'd missed a doctor's appointment. She was 5 months pregnant. He'd promised to come. Got caught at work. Texted at the last minute. Sorry, babe. Can't make it. You understand? She'd understood. She always understood. She remembered last week. 7 months pregnant. Feet swollen. Back aching. Standing in the kitchen, making dinner. Richard had walked past her without speaking. On his phone. In his world. She could have been a ghost. Grace closed the file folder. Put it back in the drawer. Locked it. The key went into her jewelry box, hidden behind her grandmother's pearls. She got dressed for the doctor. Maternity jeans, soft sweater, ballet flats, comfortable. She didn't need to be decorative today. Richard wasn't watching. The drive to Dr. Raines's office took 20 minutes. Through streets Grace used to know. Before the penthouse, before Richard, when she was just Grace Morrison. Young, ambitious, whole. She remembered who that woman was, barely, like a photograph fading with time. But that woman was still there, buried under 3 years of yes, dear, and of course, honey, and whatever you think is best. Still there, still breathing, still waiting. Today, Grace Morrison started waking up. Dr. Patricia Raines had kind eyes and no-nonsense hands. 52 years old, 3 grown daughters. 20 years of delivering babies and hearing women's secrets. She'd seen everything, judged nothing. Grace sat on the examination table, paper crinkling under her. The room smelled like antiseptic and lavender. Dr. Raines always had a lavender diffuser, said it calmed anxious mothers. Grace wasn't calm. Blood pressure's elevated, Dr. Raines said, unwrapping the cuff from Grace's arm. Not dangerous yet, but concerning. 140/90. Grace nodded. She'd been checking it at home, watching the numbers climb week by week. Stress, anxiety, the weight of being invisible. How are you feeling? Dr. Raines asked. The question should have been simple. It wasn't. Fine, Grace said automatically. Dr. Raines pulled up a stool, sat down, made eye contact. Grace, I've been your doctor for 6 months now. Your blood pressure was perfect at your first appointment. 110/70. Textbook. What changed? Everything. Nothing. Grace didn't know how to answer. The clock on the wall ticked, loud, insistent, measuring out seconds that felt like hours. My husband's having business problems, Grace finally said. How are you having? The question landed like a stone in still water. ripples spreading. When had someone last asked how she was? Really asked, and waited for an answer. I'm fine, Grace said again. Your body says otherwise. Elevated blood pressure, you've lost weight. Not much, but you should be gaining at this stage. And there are shadows under your eyes that weren't there last month. Grace looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap, the way she always held them. Small, contained, the way she held them at Richard's business dinners. The way she'd learned to take up no space. Have you thought about what happens after the baby? Deraines asked. Maternity leave, then back to normal. What's normal? The question shouldn't have been difficult. Normal was the penthouse, the routine, the life she'd built with Richard. Except she hadn't built it. He had. She just lived there. Taking care of the house, supporting my husband, being a mother. What about being Grace? The name sounded foreign, like a word from a language she used to speak but had forgotten. Grace's phone rang. Richard, she answered reflexively. Pavlovian. Grace, where are you? Doctor's appointment. Remember? I told you this morning. Silence. He hadn't listened. He never listened. Background noise told her he was in the car, driving somewhere urgent, somewhere that mattered more than his pregnant wife's appointment. I need you to do something, Richard said. Not asked, needed. My mother is hosting a luncheon. Potential investors, people who might replace the Blackwood Capital funding. I need you there. 1 hour, looking presentable, smiling, not discussing business. Can you handle that? Grace's fingers tightened on the phone. Dr. Raines was watching, concerned, professional. Seeing too much. When? Grace asked, her voice steady. 12:30. I'm texting you the address now. Wear the blue dress, the one that hides the bump better. He hung up. Grace stared at her phone. The screen went dark. Her reflection stared back. Distorted. Unfamiliar. A pregnant woman being told to hide her pregnancy. He just told me to hide my pregnancy, Grace said aloud. To Dr. Raines, to herself, to the universe. At my OB appointment, he told me to hide being pregnant. Dr. Raines leaned forward. Her voice was gentle but firm. Grace, are you safe? The question was so unexpected that Grace almost laughed. Safe? Of course she was safe. Richard wasn't violent. He didn't yell. He didn't hit. He just erased her. Slowly, quietly, one dismissal at a time. I'm fine, Grace said, the third time. The lie tasted familiar, like something she'd been swallowing for years. If you need resources, support groups, therapist recommendations, even just someone to talk to. I don't, really. Thank you. Grace stood, carefully. Pregnancy made everything careful. She gathered her purse, her phone, her dignity. Your blood pressure, Dr. Raines said. We need to monitor it. If it goes higher, we're talking bed rest, possible early delivery. I understand. Grace, Dr. Raines stood too, touched her arm, warm, human. You matter, not just as a mother, not just as a wife. You matter. The words hit like a physical blow. Grace felt tears threaten. She blinked them back. Morrison women didn't cry in public. Thank you, Grace whispered. She left the office, walked to her car. The blue dress was in her trunk. She always kept backup clothes now. Never knew when Richard would need her to perform, to look presentable, to hide the bump better. Grace drove to Vivian's house, Richard's mother, the matriarch, the woman who'd raised a son who couldn't see his own wife. The estate was in Pacific Heights, 8 bedrooms, manicured gardens, staff in uniform, old money pretending to be old money. Vivian's father had been a tech entrepreneur, new money, but she'd married into an old San Francisco family, bought herself a pedigree. Grace parked in the circular driveway, sat in the car for a moment. The blue dress lay across the passenger seat, silk, navy, empire waist, designed to hide pregnancy, make her look less pregnant, more acceptable. She checked her appearance in the rearview mirror, practiced her smile, the one she wore at these events, warm but not too warm, interested but not too interested, pretty but not threatening, present but invisible. She'd perfected it, the smile that made her disappear. Grace changed in the car. Awkward, uncomfortable. 7 months pregnant, contorting in a front seat. But she managed. The blue dress fit, barely. Her belly strained against the silk, but it hid more than the maternity dress had. Mission accomplished. She walked to the front door. House staff opened it before she could knock. They knew her, the pregnant wife, the disappointment, Richard's choice that no one understood. The luncheon was on the terrace. 12 women, all over 55, all dripping diamonds and judgment, all looking at Grace like she was a child playing dress-up in mommy's clothes. Grace, Vivian's voice was honey poured over acid. How lovely you could join us. Join, not host, not co-host, join. Like a guest, an outsider, in her own family. Grace smiled, the practiced smile. Thank you for including me, Vivian. Richard was there, talking to Owen and two men Grace didn't recognize. He glanced at her, nodded once. Approval. She'd worn the right dress, hidden the bump adequately. Good girl, good wife, good decoration. Something inside Grace shifted. Not broke, shifted, like tectonic plates moving underground, invisible but powerful. The earthquake would come later. But the movement started now. She sat where Vivian indicated, end of the table, furthest from the important people, closest to the door, easy to ignore, easy to forget. The conversation flowed around her. Real estate values, market predictions, the unfortunate state of the economy, things Grace could have contributed to. She had opinions, knowledge, a $42 million portfolio. But no one asked. She was furniture, pregnant furniture, taking up space but contributing nothing. Grace placed her hands on her belly. The baby kicked. 1, 2, 3 times. Morse code, a message. Hold on, we're almost there. She took a breath, then another, counted backward from 10. But this time something was different. This time Grace Morrison wasn't trying to stay calm. She was trying to stay quiet. And those were two very different things. The volcano was building, the pressure increasing, the eruption was coming, and when it came, nothing would ever be the same. The terrace overlooked San Francisco Bay. Sailboats dotted the water like white petals. The sky was that particular blue that only California could produce. Vivian's staff served poached salmon and arugula salad on china that probably cost more than Grace's car. Grace pushed lettuce around her plate. The baby didn't like fish today, or maybe Grace didn't. Hard to tell anymore where she ended and the pregnancy began. Margaret something, one of Vivian's tennis partners, turned to Grace, smile sharp as broken glass. And what do you do, dear, besides growing that baby? The table laughed, polite, practiced, the kind of laugh that wasn't really a laugh but a social signal. We're all in on the joke together, the joke being Grace. Grace opened her mouth, ready with the standard answer. I support Richard. I manage our home. I prepare for motherhood. The script she'd been reciting for 3 years. But before she could speak, Vivian jumped in. Helpful, maternal, condescending. Grace keeps busy with charity work and decorating their lovely home. Richard needs someone in to manage the domestic sphere while he changes the world. The domestic sphere. Like Grace was a maid, a decorator, an incubator with a pulse. The baby kicked, hard, right against her ribs. Grace winced, pressed her hand to the spot. Richard glanced over from his conversation with Owen and the investors, checked that she was behaving, that she wasn't embarrassing him, that she was playing her role correctly. Grace met his eyes. He nodded. Approval. Look away. Back to business. Back to people who mattered. Something in Grace's chest cracked. Not her heart, something deeper, the foundation of who she'd been pretending to be. Actually, Grace heard herself say, her voice clear, steady, loud enough to carry. I work in venture capital. The terrace went quiet. 12 women froze, forks halfway to mouths, wine glasses suspended in air. Even the sailboats seemed to stop moving. Margaret blinked. Oh, you mean you used to work, before you met Richard? No. Grace set down her fork, carefully, precisely. Present tense. I currently manage a portfolio of investments through Blackwood Capital. The silence was absolute. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses against your skin, that makes you aware of your own breathing. Richard stood, his chair scraped against stone. Loud, harsh. Grace? A word. Now. But Owen was staring at her. His face had gone white, bloodless, like he'd seen a ghost. Blackwood Capital? Owen's voice cracked. Your Blackwood Capital? Yes. You're the investor? Owen couldn't seem to form complete sentences. The one who pulled funding? That's you? Grace nodded, once. Simple, honest. Richard looked between them, confused. Then understanding dawned. Horror followed close behind. That's impossible, he said flatly. Denial. First stage of grief. Grace stood, 7 months pregnant, blue dress straining against her belly, hair starting to escape its pins, the facade crumbling in real time. $6 million, she said calmly, like she was discussing the weather, like she wasn't detonating a bomb at her mother-in-law's luncheon. Withdrawn from 3 projects, Portland development, green tech acquisition, medical device startup. The investors leaned forward, interested now. This was better than business talk. This was drama. This was a show. All 3 projects were disasters waiting to happen, Grace continued. Portland development had inflated property values. Seller falsified records. Due diligence was incomplete. You would have lost $4 million within 6 months. She reached into her purse, pulled out a folder, set it on the table. Neat, organized, professional. Green Tech Acquisition, the company is currently under EPA investigation for falsified environmental impact reports. Should be public knowledge within 6 weeks. Stock will drop 40%. You would have lost everything. Another folder, thicker, color-coded tabs. Medical device startup, violated 3 FDA protocols. Device fails safety standards. Will never get approval. 3 years of investment down the drain. Third folder, thickest of all, years of research, analysis, work. Richard's face cycled through emotions. Disbelief, anger, betrayal, finally landing on rage. You sabotaged me? I saved you. Grace's voice didn't waver. Those projects would have bankrupted you within 18 months. I tried to tell you 6 months ago at Bella Vista. Remember? Richard's jaw clenched. He didn't remember. Of course he didn't remember. You said venture capital was too complicated for me, Grace said. You said I wouldn't understand the intricacies of funding structures. You laughed, patted my hand, went back to your dinner. The luncheon guests were frozen, 12 women watching a marriage implode. Vivian looked faint, one hand pressed to her chest, pearl necklace rising and falling with quick breaths. So I stopped trying to tell you, Grace continued. I withdrew funding. I saved your company, and you never even noticed. You had no right, Richard said, his voice low, dangerous, the voice he used in negotiations when he was trying to intimidate. Those were my decisions, my business, my company. Built with whose money? Grace asked. Quiet, deadly. Who do you think has been funding your ventures for 3 years? My father's firm? Your investors? Or maybe your wife, who you think doesn't understand business? Richard grabbed her arm, not hard, but firm, fingers circling her wrist. Don't do this. Not here. Not now. Grace looked down at his hand, then up at his face. Let go, Buen. We're leaving. This conversation is over. Richard. Owen's voice. Warning. Urgent. People are watching. Witnesses. Let her go. Richard held on for another second, establishing dominance, proving power. Then he released her, slowly. Grace could feel the imprint of his fingers, not painful, but present, a mark, a warning. She turned to Vivian. Thank you for lunch. The salmon was lovely. Then she walked away, across the terrace, through the house, down the front steps, to her car in the circular driveway. Her hands shook as she started the engine. Her whole body shook. Adrenaline, fear, relief, all mixing together until she couldn't tell which was which. The baby did gymnastics, somersaults. celebrating or panicking. Grace pressed both hands to her belly. "It's done," she whispered. "No going back now." She drove. No destination. Just away. Down the hill from Pacific Heights. Through streets she used to know. Toward the bay. Toward the overlook where she and Beth used to go in college. When life got too heavy. When they needed to think. The overlook was empty, just Grace and the water and the weight of what she'd done. She pulled into the parking space, turned off the engine, sat in silence. Her phone erupted. Texts, calls, voicemails, Richard, Vivian, Owen, unknown numbers. Everyone who'd witnessed the explosion wanting front row seats to the fallout. Grace turned off her phone. Complete silence. Just her and the baby in the bay stretching to the horizon. She'd blown up her life. Publicly. Spectacularly. Irrevocably. By tonight, everyone in their social circle would know. By tomorrow, the business community would hear. By next week, there would be no going back. Grace should have felt terrified, should have regretted it, should have been planning how to fix it. Instead, she felt light, weightless, like she'd been carrying something heavy for 3 years and finally set it down. A knock on her window made her jump. Beth stood outside. Concerned, protective, best friend radar. Grace unlocked the door. Beth climbed into the passenger seat, didn't speak, just sat. Presence, support, the thing Grace needed most. "How did you find me?" Grace finally asked. "You always come here when you're processing. Since sophomore year, remember?" Grace did remember the overlook, their spot, before Richard, before marriage, before everything changed. "I told him," Grace said, "at Vivian's luncheon, in front of everyone, I told him I'm Blackwood Capital." "I know. It's trending on social media. Vivian's friends are not subtle with their live tweeting." "Of course, the spectacle, the drama, digital age theater. By tonight hashtags, by tomorrow memes." "He grabbed my arm," Grace said quietly. "When I tried to leave, in front of everyone, he grabbed me." Beth's expression darkened. Dangerous, protective. "Did he hurt you?" "No, but he wanted to control me, to stop me from leaving, from speaking, from existing outside his permission." Grace stared at the water. Gray today, matching the scheme, everything gray except the white sailboats, little triangles of hope. "You know what I did last night?" Grace continued. "I laid in bed, fully dressed, heels still on, staring at the ceiling, waiting for him to come to bed. And when he finally did at 2 in the morning, I pretended to be asleep. Because I've learned that taking up space makes him uncomfortable. Having needs makes him uncomfortable. Being a person makes him uncomfortable." Beth reached over, took Grace's hand, squeezed, held on. "I'm 7 months pregnant," Grace whispered. "I'm supposed to be building a nursery, planning a future, feeling excited. Instead, I'm dismantling my marriage in front of his mother's tennis partners." "Or," Beth said gently, "you're saving yourself before there's nothing left to save." Grace looked at her best friend, really looked. Beth had been there for everything. College, grad school, the early days with Richard when everything was new and shiny, the slow erosion, the gradual disappearance. Beth had watched Grace shrink, never said anything, waiting for Grace to see it herself. "The worst part," Grace said, "I knew, I've known for a long time. But knowing and admitting are different things. Knowing and acting are different things. I could know and still pretend, still hope, still believe he'd change, that I could make him see me. And now? Now everyone knows. Now there's no pretending. Now I have to figure out who I am when I'm not performing Grace Hartwell. When I'm just Grace or on." The baby settled, calm, trusting, listening to everything. Grace placed both hands on her belly. The future, the reason, the why. "What happens now?" Beth asked. Grace thought about Vivian's face, the shock, the horror, the pearl-clutching scandal. She thought about Richard's rage, his control, his need to dominate. She thought about the 12 women who'd watched her walk away. "Now," Grace said slowly, "everyone knows I'm not just Richard's pregnant wife. Now everyone knows what I am." "What are you?" Grace met Beth's eyes, steady, sure, certain for the first time in 3 years. Dangerous. Grace returned to the penthouse at 8 in the evening. The sun had set over the bay. City lights sparkled like stars that had fallen to earth. 42 floors up. Still felt like a cage. The penthouse was dark except for one light. The living room. Richard waited there. She could feel his presence before she saw him. Heavy, oppressive, angry. Grace set down her purse, removed her coat. Slow movements, deliberate. She wasn't afraid. She was exhausted. 3 years of fear had burned through in a single afternoon. Richard sat in the armchair, not the couch. The armchair positioned to face the door, power position, interrogation position. He'd probably planned it. "We need to talk." His voice was controlled, careful, the kind of calm that came from barely contained rage. Grace sat on the couch, not next to him, across from him, distance, boundaries. "Okay? Why?" One word, simple, loaded with everything. "Why what?" Grace asked. "Why did I invest? Why did I pull funding? Why did I tell you? Why do you want answered? Don't play games with me." "I'm not playing anything. You never asked. You assumed. There's a difference." Richard leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You let me believe you were someone you're not. For 3 years, you lied." "I never lied," Grace said calmly. "You decided who I was. Decorative, domestic, dumb. I let you believe it, but I never actually lied." "That's semantics. That's manipulation." "Is it? Or is it survival? You made it very clear what you wanted in a wife. I became that. To keep the peace, to make you happy, to save our marriage. By sabotaging my company?" Grace laughed. No humor. Just exhaustion. "I didn't sabotage anything. I prevented disaster. Those 3 projects were financial suicide. I tried to tell you. You dismissed me. So I acted. Without telling me, without discussing it. You just decided. And the way you decided we'd move to this penthouse without asking my opinion? The way you decided I'd quit my job without considering alternatives? The way you decide everything about our lives without consulting me?" Richard sat back, defensive. "That's not fair. We discussed those things." "No, you told me. I agreed. There's a difference." The silence stretched between them. 3 years of unspoken resentments. 3 years of swallowed words. 3 years of Grace making herself smaller while Richard grew larger. The baby kicked. Grace winced. Richard noticed. Finally. "Are you okay?" The concern was automatic, surface level. He was asking about the baby. Not her, never her. "No," Grace said honestly. "I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time." Richard stood, paced, kinetic energy. It controlled violence. Not physical, emotional. "I never treated you badly. You made me invisible." "That's dramatic. You introduced me as just your wife. Multiple times. You forgot my birthday 2 years in a row. You missed 3 doctor's appointments. You told me to hide my pregnancy at your mother's luncheon. I said wear the blue dress. You said wear the dress that hides the bump better, while I was at my OB appointment. You told your pregnant wife to hide being pregnant." Richard stopped pacing. "You're twisting my words." "I'm repeating them exactly." Grace stood too, 7 months pregnant, blue dress wrinkled from a day of drama. Hair fully escaped its pins now, cascading over her shoulders. Wold, uncontrolled, real. "You want to know why?" Grace asked, her voice rising. First time in 3 years. "Because I was dying, slowly, quietly, one dismissal at a time. Every time you spoke over me. Every time you corrected me in public. Every time you forgot I existed. I died a little, until I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back." "That's not my fault," Richard said. "I didn't make you feel that way. You chose to feel that way." The words hung in the air. Blame, deflection, classic move. Make the victim responsible for their own hurt. "You're right," Grace said quietly. "I chose it. I chose to stay quiet. I chose to make myself small. I chose to hope you'd change. I chose to believe your promises. I chose wrong." Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at Grace. It's Owen. The board wants to meet. About everything, about Blackwood Capital, about the funding, about you. Of course they do. They want you there. Grace laughed again, bitter, harsh. Now they want me there. When my money is on the line, when my analysis matters, now I get a seat at the table. Will you come? Grace looked at her husband, really looked. Tried to see the man she'd fallen in love with. The man from the coffee shop in the Mission. The man who'd proposed at sunset. The man who'd promised partnership and equality. That man was gone. Or maybe he'd never existed. Maybe Grace had built him from hope and potential. Maybe she'd loved a fiction. I'll think about it, Grace said. She walked to the bedroom. Their bedroom, though it had never really been theirs. Richard had chosen the furniture, the paint color, the sheets. Grace had simply agreed, always agreed. She closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed. The woman in the window reflection looked different than yesterday. Bigger, not physically, energetically, taking up space, claiming territory. Grace pulled out her laptop, opened her encrypted files, the portfolio, the investments, the business she'd built in secret. $42 million. Power, independence, freedom. She opened a new file, typed a name at the top. Morrison Hartwell Ventures. Not Morrison, not Hartwell, both. Together, equal. The company she should have built 3 years ago. The company she was building now. Grace typed quickly. Business plan, organizational structure. Investment strategy. The work flowed like water. Natural. Right. This was who she was. Not the woman making breakfast and hiding hot sauce. Not the woman practicing smiles in rearview mirrors. This woman who understood numbers and risk and vision. An hour passed, then 2. Grace worked. The baby settled. Content. Maybe he could feel it, or she. Their child. Growing inside a mother who was finally growing too. A knock on the door. Richard's voice. Grace? She didn't answer, just kept typing. I'm sorry, Richard said through the door. I didn't realize how you felt. I didn't see it. Grace stopped typing, waited. Can we talk? Please? She saved her work, closed the laptop, opened the door. Richard stood in the hallway, vulnerable, uncertain, an expression she'd never seen on his face before. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. I know. Tell me how to fix it. Grace leaned against the doorframe, exhausted, sad, certain. Start by seeing me, not as your wife, not as the mother of your child, not as a problem to solve or an asset to manage, as a person, as Grace. I do see you. You see what you want to see, what's convenient to see. A woman who needs you, who waits for you, who exists to support your life, your dreams, your future. That's not fair. Neither is 3 years of being erased. Grace's voice broke. Neither is forgetting my birthday. Neither is asking me to hide my pregnancy. Neither is grabbing my arm in public. Richard flinched. I didn't hurt you. You did, just not physically. But you did. They stood in the doorway, 3 years of marriage between them. 3 years of misunderstanding and unspoken pain and slow erosion. I need space, Grace said finally, to figure out what I want, what's best for me and the baby. Our baby, Richard said, possessive, claiming. Grace's smile was sad, tired. Yes, our baby, the baby you've been calling the baby for 7 months instead of our son. When Richard's face went pale, bloodless. We're having a boy. I found out 3 weeks ago. I was waiting for the right time to tell you. But you were always busy, always working, always somewhere else. So I stopped waiting. The weight of everything unsaid crashed down. 3 years of almosts, of could-have-beens, of if-onlys. Grace, her phone rang. Dylan, perfect timing. I need to take this, Grace said, not asking permission, not apologizing, just stating fact. She answered, Dylan, yes, I'm done here. She hung up, looked at Richard, saw the jealousy flash across his face, the suspicion, the fear. Who's Dylan? Richard asked. My business partner, my friend, someone who listens when I talk, someone who treats me like an equal. Are you? Richard couldn't finish the sentence. The accusation too ugly to voice. Having an affair? No, that's your mother's theory, not reality. Dylan is happily married with 2 daughters. He's gay. He's my mentor, and he sees me. He's actually sees me. That's not romance. That's respect. Grace walked past Richard, down the hallway, to the guest room. She opened the door, looked back. I'll sleep here tonight, and tomorrow we'll talk about next steps. But right now, I need space, and you need to decide if you can actually see me, or if you just want to control me. She closed the door, locked it, leaned against it, breathing, shaking, alive. On the other side, Richard stood in silence, learning what it felt like to be shut out, to be invisible, to be powerless, learning what Grace had felt for 3 years. 3 days passed, 3 days of careful distance and loaded silence. Grace stayed in the guest room. Richard stayed in the master. They communicated through text messages, polite, brief, strangers sharing space. Grace used the time to work, real work. She contacted Dylan, set up meetings, planned strategy. Morrison Hartwell Ventures was becoming real, no longer hidden, no longer secret. On the 3rd day the board meeting happened, 10 people around a conference table, Richard, Owen, 6 board members, 2 lawyers, and Grace. The boardroom was on the 35th floor of Richard's office building, floor-to-ceiling windows, view of the bay, expensive furniture, power plays and money everywhere. Grace entered at 9 in the morning, 8 months pregnant now, professional suit, not maternity, regular suit that happened to fit, hair down, natural, no more performing, just existing. Everyone stared. She'd expected that. The pregnant wife who'd bombed her mother-in-law's luncheon was now sitting in their boardroom. The scandal had legs. The gossip had spread. Everyone knew. Grace took a seat at the table, not at the end, in the middle, between Owen and one of the board members. Power position, equal position. Owen had to shift his materials. "Shall we begin?" Grace said calmly. The chairman cleared his throat. Mitchell Carrington, 63, old money. Old guard, he'd met Grace 4 times at various functions, had never remembered her name. Now he couldn't look away. "Mrs. Hartwell," he paused, uncertain of protocol. "Morrison Hartwell," Grace corrected gently. "I kept my name. Legally, you just never used it." Mitchell shifted uncomfortably. Adjusted papers that didn't need adjusting. "Right, Morrison Hartwell, we understand you're the primary investor behind Blackwood Capital." "One of them," Grace said. "My business partner, Dylan Mercer, and I co-founded the firm 5 years ago, before I married Richard." Richard's jaw clenched. The vein in his temple pulsed. He hadn't known about Dylan, hadn't asked, hadn't cared. "So you've been running a venture capital firm throughout your marriage?" Mitchell continued. "Yes. And your husband didn't know?" Grace met Richard's eyes across the table, held his gaze. "Richard never asked what I did with my time. He assumed I lunched with friends and decorated our home. I let him assume. But I never lied." Owen spoke up, careful, diplomatic. "The withdrawal of funding from 3 major projects. Can you explain the reasoning?" "Of course." Grace opened her briefcase, pulled out 3 folders, thick, detailed, professional. "The Portland development was overvalued by approximately 30%. The seller, Marcus Development Group, inflated property records. Building permits were falsified. Environmental impact studies were incomplete. Due diligence was insufficient." She slid the first folder across the table. It landed in front of Mitchell. He opened it, started reading. His expression shifted from skepticism to shock. "The Green Tech acquisition," Grace continued. "Ecosphere Solutions, currently under EPA investigation for falsified environmental impact reports. The technology doesn't work as advertised. The patents are disputed, 3 lawsuits pending. Public disclosure expected within 4 to 6 weeks." Second folder, thicker, more documentation, color-coded tabs, years of research. "The medical device startup, Cardiotech Innovations. The device violated 3 FDA safety protocols. Testing data was manipulated. Clinical trials were compromised. The device will never receive approval. Investors will lose everything within 12 to 18 months. Third folder. Thickest of all. Medical records. FDA correspondence. Legal documents. Everything. The board members passed folders around. Reading, absorbing, understanding dawning on their faces. Mitchell looked up, directly at Grace. This is comprehensive analysis, professional grade. Where did you get this information? Research, due diligence, the kind any competent investor conducts before committing capital. I've been tracking these companies for 8 months. I tried to warn Richard 6 months ago. He dismissed my concerns. That's not true, Richard interjected. You never warned me about these specific issues. Yes, I did, 6 months ago. Bella Vista restaurant. Thursday night, I told you the Portland development had red flags. You said, and I quote, "Leave the business to me, sweetheart." The room went quiet. Owen shifted uncomfortably. One of the board members coughed. I never mentioned it again, Grace continued. So when Richard was about to sign contracts that would destroy him financially, I withdrew funding. I saved him from himself. This is still a conflict of interest, one of the lawyers said. Young, ambitious, trying to make a point. You're his wife. You had insider information. I had publicly available information, Grace corrected, plus the kind of thorough due diligence that Richard apparently doesn't conduct. Nothing I used was privileged or private. Everything is documented in those folders. Court records, EPA filings, FDA correspondence, public information that anyone could access. Richard simply didn't look. Grace placed her hands on the conference table. Flat, steady, not hidden in her lap, not folded small, taking up space, claiming territory. You have 2 options, she said clearly. Accept my analysis. Let me consult on future investments. Prevent disasters before they happen. Or reject it. Proceed with the deals. Lose everything within 18 months. Your choice. Owen spoke quietly, almost reluctantly. I ran the numbers after the luncheon. Everything she said checks out. Portland Development is currently in litigation. EPA opened an investigation into Ecosphere last week. Cardiotech's clinical trial data is under review. Grace was right about everything. Richard looked at Owen, betrayed. You're taking her side? I'm taking the side of facts, Owen replied. I'm not married to you, Richard. I can see this clearly. She saved us. You're just too proud to admit it. The baby kicked. Hard. Grace pressed her hand to her belly. The movement was visible. Real. Undeniable. She was 8 months pregnant, sitting in a boardroom, schooling men twice her age about business. And she'd been doing it in secret for 3 years. Mitchell cleared his throat. Why withdraw funding without explanation? Why not just tell him? Grace's smile was sad, tired. How many times have you been in meetings with Richard and me? How many business dinners? How many events? Mitchell thought. Several, maybe a dozen. How many times did you ask my opinion? How many times did anyone ask what I thought about the business discussions happening around me? Silence. The answer was 0. Everyone knew it. Exactly, Grace said. I was decorative, present but invisible, so I stopped trying to be seen. I just acted, quietly, effectively, without permission. One of the board members, Patricia Chen, spoke for the first time. I'm ashamed to say I never knew you had this background, this expertise. Why didn't you say something sooner? I tried. No one listened, not even my husband. The words hung heavy, indictment, truth, uncomfortable reality. Mitchell looked around the table, reading the room. I propose we accept Ms. Morrison Hartwell's offer to consult. Clearly she has insight we've been lacking. Agreed, Patricia said immediately. The other board members nodded, one by one. Consensus building. Power shifting. The pregnant wife was now a consultant, an expert, an equal. Richard sat in silence, watching his world reorganize around him, watching his wife become a colleague, watching control slip away. One more thing, Grace said. She pulled out another folder. Thin, simple. Morrison Hartwell Ventures, my new firm, no longer operating through shell companies, no longer hidden. I'm launching publicly next month. Dylan Mercer as co-founder, 42 million in assets under management. If anyone at this table is interested in investing, my contact information is inside. She stood, carefully, 8 months pregnant, professional suit, power radiating from her like heat. Thank you for your time. I look forward to working with you all, as equals. Grace walked out of the boardroom, down the hallway, to the elevator. She pressed the button, waited, breathing, shaking, triumphant. The elevator arrived. She stepped inside. The door started to close. Richard's hands shot out. Stop them. He stepped inside. The doors closed, just the two of them in a small metal box. That was impressive, Richard said quietly. That was necessary. I'm sorry. Grace looked at him, really looked, searching for sincerity, for understanding, for change. Sorry for what? She asked. For dismissing me? For embarrassing me? For 3 years of making me invisible? Which part are you sorry for? All of it. I didn't see you. I see that now. I see what I did, what I didn't do. I'm sorry. The elevator descended, 42 floors of silence and truth. I'm sorry too, Grace said softly, for letting it happen, for not speaking up sooner, for making myself small, for hoping you'd change without telling you what needed to change. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened, outside world waiting, bright, loud, real. Grace stepped out. Richard followed. What happens now? He asked. Grace placed both hands on her belly. The baby moved, restless, ready. Only a few weeks left now. Now, she said, we figure out if we can be partners, real partners, or if we're just two people who share a child and nothing else. She walked away, out of the building, into sunshine, into her life, the one she was building, brick by brick, choice by choice, no longer waiting for permission, no longer hoping to be seen, just existing, powerfully, completely. Finally, 2 weeks passed, 2 weeks of careful negotiations and difficult conversations. Grace moved back into the master bedroom. Not because Richard demanded it, because she chose it. The difference mattered. Richard started therapy, individual sessions, twice a week. He came home from the first session quiet, contemplative, different. My therapist says I have control issues, he told Grace over dinner. Takeout Thai, from the place Grace liked, with extra hot sauce. She says I use dismissiveness as a defense mechanism. Basically, I'm an ass. Basically, Grace agreed. No sugarcoating, just truth. Richard actually smiled. Small, genuine. I signed papers today. The penthouse, it's in your name now, fully. No contest. Your property. Grace hadn't expected that. Richard, you don't have to. I do. I need to make things tangible, real. You're not my appendage. You're not my possession. You're my equal. This is me acknowledging that. He pulled out another folder. Legal documents. 50% of my company stock transferred to you. Irrevocably, you're a partner. Officially, legally, no more consulting, no more asking permission. You own half of what I built. Grace stared at the papers, the signatures, the legal weight. This wasn't just apologizing. This was action, change, proof. Why'd she say? Why, she asked. Because you were right about everything, about the investments, about me, about us. And because I'm terrified that if I don't change, really change, I'll lose you. I'll lose our son. I'll lose everything that actually matters. Our son, not the baby, our son, finally. You know we're having a boy? Grace asked. I called Dr. Raines, asked if she could tell me. She said you'd found out weeks ago, that you'd been waiting to tell me, that I'd been too busy to notice. Richard's eyes were red, not crying, but close. I've been too busy to notice my own life, my own wife, the person I love. I've been so focused on building success that I forgot what success was supposed to look like. Grace's water broke. Right then, in the middle of their kitchen, over Thai food and legal documents and confessions. Warm liquid. Undeniable reality. They stared at each other, surprised. Then Grace started laughing. The situation was too absurd, too perfect, too ridiculously timed. Hospital? Richard asked. Hospital, Grace confirmed. The drive was quiet, focused, different than before. Richard kept glancing at her, not to check if she was behaving, to check if she was okay, to see her, really see her. They arrived at the hospital at 7 in the evening. Dr. Rains met them, calm, professional. Right on time, 38 weeks exactly. Perfect timing, Grace. Labor was long, 14 hours. Grace had expected pain. She hadn't expected clarity. Something about the physical intensity burned away everything else. The pretending, the fear, the uncertainty, just breath and pain and purpose. Richard stayed, didn't leave, didn't check his phone, just stayed, held her hand, breathed with her. Present, finally present. Beth arrived at midnight, brought ice chips and terrible jokes, made Grace laugh between contractions, reminded her of who she was beyond wife and mother. Just Grace. The woman who'd survived college and grad school and 3 years of erasure. Strong, capable, whole. You've got this, Beth whispered during a particularly brutal contraction. You've been doing hard things all year. This is just one more. At 9 in the morning, Doreen said the words Grace had been waiting for. One more push. You've got this. Meet your son. And Grace did have it. She'd been having it all along, just needed to remember. Their son arrived crying, loud, insistent, alive. 7 pounds 4 ounces, healthy, perfect, real. The nurse placed him on Grace's chest, warm, wet, squirming, the most real thing she'd ever felt. Hi, baby. Grace whispered, and I'm your mom. I've been waiting to meet you. Richard stood beside the bed, careful, reverent, like he was afraid of breaking something precious. Can I hold him? Grace nodded. The nurse helped transfer their son. So small, so fragile, so powerful. Richard held their baby, tears streaming down his face. Not hiding them, not controlling them, just feeling. He's perfect. He's so perfect. What should we name him? Grace asked. Richard looked at her, asking, not telling, waiting for her opinion, for her voice, for her choice. Morrison, Grace said, Morrison Hartwell. After my father, after me. After the name I kept even when I wasn't using it. Morrison, Richard repeated, tasting the name. Morrison Hartwell. I love it. It's strong. It's meaningful. It's perfect. He handed their son back to Grace, carefully, gently, like he understood now that some things were precious, some things needed care. Grace held Morrison, their son, the reason, the why, the future. He opened his eyes, dark blue, unfocused, new, looking at her like she was the entire world. Your mom is incredible, Richard said to Morrison. She's strong and smart and powerful, and I forgot that for a while. But I won't forget again. I promise. The promise hung in the air. Time would tell if it was real, if change was possible, if 3 years of damage could heal. Grace didn't know, but for now, in this moment, holding their son, while her husband actually saw her, she had hope. 3 days later, they brought Morrison home. The nursery was ready. Grace and Richard had painted it together, actually together, discussing colors, compromising, building something with 4 hands instead of 2. The first night home was Case, crying, feeding, changing, the beautiful mess of new life. Richard didn't sleep, neither did Grace. They tag-teamed. Partners, actually partners. Learning together, failing together, succeeding together. At 3 in the morning, Grace sat in the nursery, feeding Morrison, exhausted, overwhelmed, happy. Richard appeared in the doorway, holding coffee, decaf, with almond milk, the way she liked it. He'd remembered. How are you? He asked. Actually asking, actually waiting for the answer. Tired, sore, terrified I'm doing everything wrong. Perfect. Richard sat beside them. watched Morrison eat, tiny hands gripping Grace's finger. I researched parental leave. I'm taking 6 weeks, full-time, here, with you and Morrison. Not work, not business, just family. Grace looked at him, surprised. 6 weeks? I called the board yesterday, told them I'm taking time off, told them Morrison is more important than quarterly reports, told them you're running Morrison Hartwell Ventures and I need to be home supporting you. What did they say? Patricia said it's about time. Mitchell looked shocked. Owen said good for you. I think they've been waiting for me to figure out what matters. Morrison finished eating, fell asleep in Grace's arms. Perfect, peaceful, complete. I don't know if we'll make it, Grace said honestly. Us, our marriage, too much happened, too much hurt, too much time. I know, Richard replied, but I want to try, really try. Not control, not fix, just try, as equals, as partners, as two people figuring it out together. That's all I've ever wanted. They sat in silence. The nursery glowed soft with night lights. Morrison slept. The city whispered outside. And two people who'd almost lost everything held on to hope. Change was possible. Grace had changed. Richard was changing. Their marriage might change too, into something real, something honest, something worth keeping. Or it might end. And Grace would be okay with that too, because she'd learned the most important lesson. She didn't need Richard to be whole. She didn't need permission to be powerful. She didn't need anyone to see her value. She saw it herself, finally, completely, undeniably. And that made all the difference. 6 months later, Morrison was 6 months old, laughing, rolling, discovering the world with wide eyes and sticky hands. Grace was back to work, real work. Morrison Hartwell Ventures was thriving. 8 new investments, $23 million in new capital. Real office space in the financial district. 3 employees, growing. Dylan knocked on Grace's office door, entered with coffee, regular, with sugar. She'd given up decaf after nursing ended. The Portland development officially collapsed. Fraud charges filed against Marcus Development Group. Criminal investigation ongoing. Grace nodded, unsurprised. She'd predicted this. Timeline? Exactly as you projected, 6 months from initial investment to complete implosion. Richard would have lost everything. And Ecosphere? EPA fines totaling $12 million. Stock dropped 87%. Company filing bankruptcy next quarter. Grace made notes. Portfolio updates. Vindication felt less sweet than she'd expected. She wasn't happy these companies failed. She was relieved she'd prevented Richard from failing with them. Cardiotech? She asked. Dylan smiled, grim but satisfied. FDA officially denied approval yesterday. Device recalled. Lawsuits pending. Investors lost approximately $40 million total. Richard would have been bankrupt. Grace closed her laptop, looked out the window. San Francisco spread below. Beautiful, complex, expensive, home. How are you feeling? Dylan asked. Not about business, about her. He always asked about her. Powerful, Grace admitted. Is that wrong, to feel powerful after everything? After 3 years of feeling powerless? No, that's exactly right. Grace's phone buzzes. Richard. Text message. Picking up Morrison from daycare. Making dinner. Home by 6? She smiled. Real smile, not practiced, not performed, just genuine. Home by 6 sounds perfect. Dylan raised an eyebrow. Things are good? Things are different. Good is complicated, but we're trying, really trying. Therapy helps, boundaries help. Him actually seeing me as a human being instead of an accessory definitely helps. Think you'll make it? Grace considered the question. 6 months ago, she didn't know. Today, she still didn't know, but she was okay with the uncertainty. Maybe, maybe not. But I'm not staying because I'm afraid to leave. I'm staying because I choose to. Every day, actively. And if I stop choosing to stay, I'll leave. And I'll be okay either way. Dylan smiled, proud. That's growth. That's survival. Grace gathered her things. Laptop, folders, phone, the tools of her trade, the evidence of her existence beyond wife and mother. She was Grace Morrison Hartwell. Venture capitalist, mother, wife, person, all of it, not choosing one over the other, just existing as all of it. She drove home. The penthouse in her name now, her space, her choice to share it with Richard. The difference was everything. Richard was in the kitchen when she arrived, Morrison in a high chair, making a mess of mashed sweet potatoes, laughing, delighted by chaos. "Hi, baby," Grace said, kissing Morrison's orange-covered face. "Did you have a good day?" Morrison babbled. Grace understood exactly 0 words, but all of the meaning. Yes, good day, happy, loved. Richard plated dinner, homemade pasta, vegetables, garlic bread. He'd learned to cook, actual cooking, not just ordering takeout, learning to share domestic labor, learning that running a home took effort. "How was work?" he asked, setting plates on the table. Not the formal dining table, the kitchen table, the one they actually used, the one that felt like family. "Good. Portland development collapsed. I was right, again." "You're always right about investments. I've learned to trust your analysis over my ego." They ate. Morrison threw sweet potatoes. The dog they'd adopted last month ate them, a golden retriever named Bailey. Grace had always wanted a dog. Richard had always said no. Now he said yes, to lots of things. "I have a speaking engagement next week," Grace said. "Stanford Business School, guest lecture, Women in Venture Capital, Finding Your Voice." "That's amazing." "What day?" "I'll watch Morrison." "Wednesday, 2 hours. Can you really handle it?" "Grace, I'm his father, not a babysitter. I can handle our son for 2 hours while you change the world." Grace smiled. The language mattered. The effort mattered. The trying mattered. "Thank you." After dinner, they cleaned together. Dishes, wiping Morrison, bath time, bedtime routine. Partners, actually partners, not perfect, but trying. Grace gave the Stanford lecture on Wednesday. 200 students, mostly women, all listening, taking notes, asking questions, seeing her. "I spent 3 years making myself smaller," Grace told them, standing at a podium, confident, clear, real. "I convinced myself it was love. It was fear. Fear of being too much, too smart, too ambitious, too powerful." She paused, let the words land, the young faces watching, absorbing, learning. "Don't do that. Don't shrink. The world will try to make you small. Your partners might try. Your families might try. Your colleagues, your bosses. The patriarchy definitely will try. Don't let them." Morrison babbled from the front row. Beth held him, waved. Grace waved back. "Take up space. Use your voice. Trust your intelligence. Trust your instincts. Trust that you belong in every room you enter. Not because someone gave you permission, because you earned it, because you're competent, because you exist." The applause was loud, genuine. Grace felt it. The power of being seen, of seeing herself, of helping others see themselves. After the lecture, a young woman approached, nervous, uncertain, maybe 23, reminded Grace of herself at that age. "I'm in a relationship," the woman said quietly. Private conversation in a public space. "He's wonderful, but lately I've been making myself smaller. I didn't realize it until you said it. I've been shrinking." Grace took her hand, steady, sure, present. "Then stop, now, before 3 years pass, before you forget who you were. Before you wake up one day and don't recognize your reflection." "But I love him." "Then love him as yourself, not as a smaller version. Love him enough to be real. If he can't handle real you, then he can't handle you. And that's okay. You'll survive. You'll thrive. You'll be fine." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes, understanding dawning. "Thank you." Grace watched her leave, saw herself, saw the path she'd taken, saw the path she'd avoided. The difference was choice, agency, voice. She gathered Morrison from Beth. He was 6 months old, starting to recognize faces. He smiled when he saw Grace, with gummy, perfect. Mama, Beth said in a silly voice. Look, Morrison, it's your incredible, powerful, amazing mama who just inspired 200 women to be themselves. Morrison didn't care about inspiration. He wanted milk and a nap. Grace provided both, in the car, in a parking lot, nursing her son while mentally reviewing her lecture. Multitasking, mother and professional. Wife and person, all of it, simultaneously, exhaustingly, beautifully. Her phone rang. Richard. How did it go? He asked, actually curious, actually interested. Good, really good. I think I helped some people. You helped me. You're still helping me every day, teaching me how to be better. That's not my job, Grace said gently but firmly. I'm not your teacher. I'm your partner. We teach each other. We grow together, not one fixing the other. You're right, poor phrasing. What I meant was, you inspire me to be better. Is that better? Grace smiled. That's better. She drove home. Morrison asleep in his car seat, the city passing outside, familiar streets, new life, same Grace but different, bigger, louder, more herself. At home, Richard had flowers waiting, sunflowers, Grace's favorite. She'd mentioned it once, 3 years ago. He'd forgotten until recently. Now he remembered. Congratulations on the lecture, he said. I'm proud of you. The words were simple, the meaning complex. Grace accepted, bowed to them the pride, the support, the recognition. They put Morrison to bed together. Read him a story he was too young to understand. Sang him a song he fell asleep during. Watched him breathe. Perfect. Innocent. The future. Later in their bedroom, Grace opened her laptop. New email from Dylan. Subject line, new opportunity. She read, a major investment firm wanted to partner with Morrison Hartwell Ventures. $20 million in new capital. National expansion. Real growth. Real power. This is huge, Grace said aloud. Richard looked over from his side of the bed, reading a book about parenting. Actual book, actual effort. What's huge? Grace showed him the email, explained the opportunity, the implications, the possibilities. That's incredible, Richard said. Are you going to take it? I don't know. It would mean more travel, more time away from Morrison, from home, from you. So, Richard set down his book, full attention. You're allowed to have a career, to chase opportunities, to grow. Morrison and I will be fine. You're allowed to want more than just family. Grace looked at him, really looked. 6 months ago, he would have asked her to say no, to prioritize family, to be smaller. Today, he was telling her to be bigger. I'll think about it, Grace said. Think hard, because you're incredible at what you do. And the world needs more women taking up space in finance, in business, everywhere. They turned out the lights, lay in darkness, together but separate, still figuring it out, still learning, still trying. I love you, Richard said into the darkness. Grace thought about the words, the weight, the history, the hurt, the hope. I love you too, she said finally, but I love myself more now. That's new, that's important. That's exactly right. They fell asleep, partners, equals, imperfect, real, human. And Grace dreamed, not of perfection, not of happily ever after, just of tomorrow, of choices, of power, of being seen, of seeing herself. That was enough. 1 year later, Grace stood in front of a different podium. Bigger stage, National Women in Business Conference, Chicago, 3,000 women. All listening, all watching, all seeing. Morrison was 14 months old now, walking, talking. Mostly gibberish, but occasionally real words. Mama, Dada, dog. No, his 4 favorites. Grace's phone wallpaper was Morrison covered in spaghetti. Happy, messy, alive. Thank you for that introduction, Grace said into the microphone. Confident, clear, no notes, just truth. My name is Grace Morrison Hartwell, founder and CEO of Morrison Hartwell Ventures, mother, wife, survivor of my own making. The audience leaned forward, interested. 3,000 women who'd fought their own battles, who'd made themselves smaller, who'd found their way back. A little over a year ago, I was invisible, Grace continued. Not metaphorically, actually invisible. My husband introduced me as just his wife. His mother told people I handled the domestic sphere. Business colleagues talked over me, through me, around me. I existed but didn't matter. She paused, took a breath, felt the weight of truth, the power of speaking it. I let it happen. That's important to acknowledge. I chose silence. I chose to shrink. I told myself it was love. It was fear. Fear of being too mom. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being alone. Morrison babbled from backstage. Beth was watching him. Grace smiled, continued. But here's what I learned. Being alone is not the worst thing. Being invisible while surrounded by people is worse. Being unheard while speaking is worse. Being unseen while present is worse. Loneliness in company is the deepest loneliness. 3,000 women, some nodding, some crying, some taking notes, all understanding. So I stopped being invisible, not gradually, explosively. I revealed that I was the investor my husband had been desperately seeking. I did it at his mother's luncheon, in front of witnesses, with no plan B, just truth, raw, uncomfortable, necessary. Grace walked across the stage, energized, alive. I don't recommend my method. Therapy would have been healthier, communication would have been wiser, but sometimes we don't choose our moments. Our moments choose us. And when that moment comes, when you've finally had enough, speak. Even if your voice shakes, even if you have no plan, speak. The applause was thunderous. Grace waited for it to settle, continued. My marriage didn't end. Some of you might think that's disappointing. That I should have left. That staying meant weakness. But staying was the hardest choice I've ever made. Harder than leaving would have been. Because staying meant watching someone change. Meant risking that they wouldn't. Meant vulnerability. Meant hope. She thought about Richard, home with Morrison, playing, laughing, learning. He'd resigned from his CEO position 6 months ago, said he wanted to focus on family, on being present, on being real. The board was shocked. Grace was skeptical, but time was proving him serious. Change is possible, Grace said, but only if both people want it, only if the work happens, only if the pattern breaks completely, not just bending, breaking, shattering, rebuilding from nothing. She looked out at 3,000 faces, young, old, every shade, every background, every story, all here, all listening, all mattering. You don't need permission to be powerful, Grace said, her voice strong, clear, final. You don't need someone to see your value before you claim it. You don't need external validation to know you matter. You know, deep down, you've always known the prison door was never locked. You were always holding the key. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Grace stood in it, felt it, the power of being seen, of seeing herself, of helping others see themselves. After the speech, the questions came fast, eager, personal, professional, everything. How do you balance career and family? One woman asked. Imperfectly, Grace answered honestly. Some days I'm great at work and terrible at home. Some days reversed. Some days I fail at both. Balance is a myth. Integration is reality. You don't balance. You blend. You compromise. You forgive yourself. You try again. Do you trust your husband now? Another asked. Grace paused, considered. I trust him more than I did. Do I trust him completely? No. A trust is earned through consistent action over time. We're building it, slowly, daily, but I trust myself completely now. That's the difference. I trust that I'll be okay regardless of what he does. That's real power. What advice would you give your younger self? A college student, fresh, hopeful, unbroken. Grace smiled, sad but wise. Don't make yourself small for anyone. Not for love, not for acceptance, not for peace. Small is not peaceful. Small is suffocating. Be big. Be loud. Be yourself. The right people will love you for it. The wrong people will leave. Let them. The conference ended. Grace flew home. San Francisco, The city she'd reclaimed, the life she'd rebuilt, the self she'd recovered. Richard picked her up from the airport, Morrison in a carrier on his chest, matching t-shirts, father and son. Richard's idea, Grace's heart. "How was it?" Richard asked, taking her bag, opening her door. Small gestures, consistent ones. Good, exhausting, important. Morrison reached for her, Mama, the best word, the most important title. Grace took him, held him close, breathed him in, baby shampoo and innocence. At home, they made dinner together. Richard chopped vegetables. Grace cooked pasta. Morrison played on the floor with Bailey, the dog and the baby. Partners in chaos, best friends in mess. "I got offered a position today," Richard said casually. Too casually. Grace looked up. "What position?" "Advisory role? Part-time, consulting. I'd work from home, flexible hours. They want my experience but respect my boundaries." "Do you want it?" "I want to know what you think. If you think I can handle work and family, if you think I've changed enough, if you trust me." Grace considered. 1 year ago, she would have said what he wanted to hear. Today, she said what she thought. "I think you should try. I think you'll probably fail sometimes. I think you'll probably succeed sometimes. I think you're human, imperfect, growing. I think you should try and see what happens." Richard nodded, accepted. "That's fair. That's honest. Thank you." They ate dinner. Morrison threw peas. Bailey ate them. The chaos of family, the mess of life, the imperfect beauty of existence. Later, Grace sat at her grandmother's oak desk, the one she'd kept, the one that mattered. She opened her laptop, reviewed her portfolio. Morrison Hartwell Ventures was managing $87 million now, 15 employees, 3 offices, national presence, real power. An email waited. Subject line, advisory board position, Federal Reserve. Grace read it twice, 3 times. The Federal Reserve wanted her expertise, her voice, her perspective, national level, policy level, real influence. 2 years ago, no one knew her name. Today, the Federal Reserve was calling. Grace replied, "I'm honored. Let's discuss terms." She closed the laptop, looked around her office. The penthouse she owned, the life she'd built, the self she'd recovered. Her phone buzzed. Text from the young woman from Stanford, the one who'd been making herself smaller, the one Grace had told to stop. "I broke up with him. It hurt, but I can breathe now. Thank you for showing me it's possible." Grace smiled. Type back, "You showed yourself. I just reminded you where the key was. You unlocked the door. Proud of you." She walked to Morrison's nursery. He was asleep. Perfect. Peaceful. Dreaming whatever babies dream. Probably dogs and peas and mama. Grace placed her hand on his back. Felt him breathe. Steady. Live. The future. The reason. The why. "Your mom was lost," she whispered. "She forgot who she was. She made herself small. But she found her way back, and she's going to teach you that you never have to shrink, that you can take up space, that you matter. Always." Morrison slept on, unaware, innocent, whole. Grace walked back to the living room. Richard was there, reading, present, changed, still changing. "I got offered a Federal Reserve advisory position," Grace said. Richard looked up. Surprise. Pride. "That's incredible. Are you going to take it?" "Probably, if the terms work, if I can balance it with Morrison Hartwell Ventures and family, if it makes sense." "It makes sense," Richard said. "You're brilliant. They'd be lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have you. Morrison's lucky to have you. You're allowed to keep growing, keep expanding, keep taking up space." Grace sat beside him, close but not touching, still figuring out physical intimacy after emotional distance, still learning, still trying. "I'm writing a book," Grace said, "about my experience, about finding voice, about reclaiming power, about the prison door being unlocked." "What's it called?" "Just Grace, about becoming just Grace again. Not Grace Hartwell, not someone's wife, just Grace. The person I was before I forgot. The person I am now. The person I'll keep being. Richard reached for her hand, carefully, asking permission with touch. Grace gave it. Let him hold her hand. Chose to be beheld. I'm proud of you, he said, not as your husband, as a human being who's watched you transform. You inspire me. You inspire Morrison. You inspire thousands of women. You matter. The words landed, soft, true, important. Grace looked out at the bay, the water, the lights, the city, the world she was claiming, the space she was taking, the voice she was using. She thought about the woman she'd been, silent, small, scared, invisible. That woman was gone, not erased, transformed, integrated, part of the story, but not the whole story. She thought about the woman she was now, loud, large, brave, visible, CEO, mother, wife, person, all of it, simultaneously, imperfectly, powerfully. She thought about the women listening, the ones making themselves small, the ones forgetting their names, the ones holding keys to unlock doors. Grace Morrison Hartwell had been invisible. Now she was unavoidable. She'd been silent. Now she was deafening. She'd been small. Now she was infinite. The prison door had never been locked. She'd been holding the key all along. She just needed to remember to use it. And now she was teaching others where to find theirs. That was power, real power, transformed power. That was enough. That was everything. That was just Grace. Finally. Completely. Undeniably. Grace Morrison Hartwell stood at her son's preschool graduation. Morrison was 4 years old, confident, loud, secure. He'd never seen his mother be invisible. He'd only known her as powerful. Richard stood beside her, married, together, changed, not perfect, but trying, still trying, every day. Therapy, communication, effort, real effort. They'd had another child, daughter, Eleanor Grace Hartwell, named after Grace's grandmother, 2 years old, fearless, already taking up space. Morrison Hartwell Ventures had expanded internationally. Grace traveled monthly. Richard stayed home with the kids. Role reversal, equal partnership, real balance. Imperfect but genuine. The Federal Reserve position had led to other positions. Grace sat on 3 corporate boards, spoke at conferences worldwide, published her book. Just Grace became a bestseller, inspired millions, changed conversations, started movements. Richard's consulting business thrived, part-time, flexible, present. He'd found his own identity beyond CEO, beyond control, beyond performance. He was just Richard now. Father, partner, person. Their marriage wasn't perfect. Some days were hard, some arguments escalated, some wounds reopened. But they stayed, chose to stay, worked to stay, not from fear, from choice, active choice, daily choice. Morrison walked across the tiny stage, received his certificate, looked for his parents, found them, waved. They waved back. Pride, love, presence. After the ceremony, Morrison ran to Grace, hugged her legs. "Mama, did you see me?" "I saw you, baby. You were amazing." "I'm not a baby. I'm 4. Grace laughed. "You're right. You're 4, and amazing, and seen." Morrison ran off, playing with friends, secure, confident, whole. The way children should be, the way Grace was now, the way everyone deserved to be. Beth appeared, still Grace's best friend, always Grace's truth teller. "You did it. You really did it. You saved yourself." "I did. Took 3 years, but I did. And now you're helping others do it too. That's legacy. That's power. That's everything." Grace watched Morrison play, watched Eleanor toddle after him, watched Richard help Eleanor when she fell, watched her family exist, imperfect, real, hers. "The prison door was never locked," Grace said softly. "I just had to remember I was holding the key." Beth smiled. "And now you're teaching others where to find theirs." Grace Morrison Hartwell nodded. Certain, strong, visible, free. She'd been invisible. Now she was infinite. She'd been silent. Now she was deafening. She'd been now she was found. Not because someone saw her, because she made herself. That made all the difference. That was power. Real power. Transformed power. Just Grace power. Finally. Completely. Undeniably. Forever. Grace Morrison Hartwell learned what so many of us learn eventually. You can't wait for someone else to see your value. You have to see it yourself first. The prison door was never locked. You were always holding the key. If this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in Grace's journey, if you needed to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your power, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters too. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's making themselves smaller, someone who's forgotten their own strength, share this with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that we're holding the key. For more stories about finding your voice, reclaiming your power, and discovering that you were stronger than you knew all along, subscribe to the channel. New stories every week. Real struggles, real transformations, real hope. Until next time, remember, you matter. You're seen. You're powerful, just as you are.